Alright, so today we have the oldest request on the server, which is also the most requested video that we have right now. And it is from Baldermort, and it's MELTA guns. Now, the other day I was watching the Yellow Guardsman party, and I find it kind of funny that this becomes the most requested video on the server right after someone asked in the chat, I can't remember who right now off the top of my head, but they asked in the chat, what are MELTA weapons? Well, we're about to find out. Now, MELTA weapons... thermite on steroids. So we're just going to jump into this. And here we go. Oh.
MELTA weapons. The smoke-filled air choked all with the courage or stupidity to venture outside. For the hive world burned, every city, every erection within it. Trails of smoke and flame rose to the skies, creating a shadowed twilight existence for all. The forces of chaos seemed unstoppable, their numbers almost infinite, their weaponry and material beyond any hope of resistance. The planetary defense forces had been swept away like so many wooden toys on a regicide board. And this was almost universally true. In only one place was their reign of tyranny and blood halted, resisted. Only one. But it was with a sinking feeling of utter desolation that the last free forces on the planet looked out from their walls and parapets. The enemy were amassing. And nothing could stop them. Or so they thought.
Love it. I love his intro.
Three transports came hurtling out of the skies towards Cartargia Hive, the battered and partial shielding erected in a flash, the anti-aircraft emplacements whirling into life, like sunflowers turning their faces to the glorious dawn, each raised up and pointed towards the oncoming vehicles. At the very last instant, a communication came down from the trio of storm ravens, and a moment later, only in the very nick of time, did the guns cease their tracking. Close. But it was their way, to be in the nick of time, to only disclose the necessary, and only the minimum information required to boot. The three vessels tore down through the atmosphere so quickly that few would ever have noticed them, certainly none from a distance, the smoke still billowing from the hive as it did. Coming down towards the central square before the palace of the governor, the vehicles did not even touch down properly. They hovered for a few seconds only, as a score and a half of heavily armored space marines leapt out of open hatches down to the ground. And within heartbeats, the ravens were back in the air, heading upwards back to something in space, something in orbit. The Adeptus Astartes were here, the Emperor's own angels of death, and not just any marines, his mighty iron hands. The officer, a lieutenant by his markings, gesticulated and his men fanned out, heading for the most vulnerable positions in the walls, but most of them, it would seem, towards the gate. The governor, unprepared for such visitors, was some time in his arrival, having drunk himself into a stupor and preparing to give his entire family the gift of the Emperor's peace. He was not roused easily, but he was roused. But by the time he was even semi-presentable, the Astartes had disappeared into the hive. With all of the speed that he could muster by lashing and screaming at his poor carriers, the governor's palanquin made its way to the last known position of the Marines, the main gates. But there he found he was utterly ignored. Stepping out and barely supporting his huge girth on his underused legs, he stood watching as the Marines took up their positions. Only one word resounded around his cavernous cranium. So few. His men, now taking orders from the Marines, barked out quickly, and for the first time in his long and overstuffed life, he was superfluous to requirement. None even gave him a glance, their awe at the Marines captivating them. or actually responding and obeying the huge warriors as they barked out commands to the pitiful forces that had been about to roll over and die. Not now. Even one Marine made a difference. But now, there were over 20. But they were not as usual Marines, as far as any could tell, not being versed or experienced in the Astartes. They were larger and bulkier than any that these people had seen in Pictor propaganda. The gravis-armored Astartes moved slowly for a Marine, but deliberately, and the trap was about to be sprung. A wave of sound now hit the walls of the hive, the rumbling of huge vehicles making their way across the no-man's land betwixt the enemy lines and the battlements, and it was quickly followed by a barrage that made the shields light up like a sanguinala display. All was explosions, light, fire, and doom, as areas of the shield fell under the onslaught, tearing huge buildings apart, burning ore that they touched with promethium. The devastation was horrific. But it was really all a distraction, to draw forces to firefighting and away from the main assault. What seemed like hours were merely minutes, and the next stage of the battle erupted with such clamour that the governor now wished he had never come. Wished he had drunk his pre-prepared draught of instant painless relief.
So, most planetary governors have a incredible sense of entitlement. And the Astartes really could give two shits less what they think they're entitled to. It's uncanny.
For there was no way in his mind, not even with the Emperor's own warriors present, that they could hold out against the forces of evil. He felt justified in his apprehension when the massive doors of the hive were smashed apart by the heavy fire of the enemy. Blown off their hinges, one dangling precariously before a myriad of other shells forced it back and into the square head overhead as it slammed into a cathedral at the front of the hive. The smoke and debris still falling all around him, clarity of vision not possible beyond the gate housing itself, when the first of the huge war engines barged through the gap, and its tentacles grabbed the closest men and dashed them against walls, threw them in the air, the hideous monsters crashing and biting men in half as they appeared. But the initial shock was limited, and before he could understand what was happening, the monsters seemed to be melting before his very eyes. As he whipped around, he saw groups of 3 of these huge Primaris warriors. Eradicate, as someone had barked at one point, he was sure. They simply walked forward. Under hails of fire, lasgun, bolter, and stubber tore towards the Marines, and it seemed as if nothing could survive their ire. But onwards the Iron Hand Marines strode. Stubber rounds pinging as they ricocheted off their gravis armor. Bolters hit, but left only dents. Lasguns merely scratched their paint or made it bubble slightly. Nothing could stop them. And they appeared so calm. No shouting, no wild gesticulation, no running, and no ducking. They simply marched onwards, grinding down their enemies, making all before them a mire of melted metal and bones. And this went on for an hour, before it was simply impossible for the attacking force to come within 50 yards of the gap. So many of the monsters, armor and carriers of the traitors had been annihilated. And as one, suddenly, the firing ceased. The Marines now stood, stock still, and looked up. The governor followed their eyes. They had merely been buying time, been holding out. As the governor now saw a huge metal whale-like ship descending into low orbit, blotting out the sun.
Yep.
The governor was forced to his knees by the raising and falling of the ground itself. The shockwave that hit him, and all anywhere near the gap, as the battle barge of the Iron Hands opened fire on the collected Chaos Army below.
Yeah, you're not living.
The barrage went on for only a few minutes, but when it ended, there was not a man, woman, or beast alive outside on the plains. And the governor could only utter one sentence to convey his awe and terror at what he had witnessed. The Emperor protects.
Yes, he does.
Welcome, gentle listener. I'm Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and important war gear of the Warhammer 40k universe. The grim darkness of the far future, Where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we are going to be looking at one of the most ubiquitous and fun weapons in the setting, the legendary melter guns. Woohoo! Sorry, I may be a bit excessively chirpy on this one. Used by most of the forces of the Imperium, from the many chapters of Space Marines and the Imperial Guard through to the Sisters of Battle. For the grim darkness of the far future is populated by denizens so huge, so vicious, so murderous, and so nigh on invulnerable, that only a truly superlative destructive weapon can even tickle the sides. But in this handheld weapon, the Melta, the odds are finally evened. For even one man or woman holding this weapon and applying it correctly can blunt the advance of an entire column. It can bring the mightiest hero in the most superb armor low. It can melt a tank in seconds and make the largest and most intimidating Tyranid bioform so much goo in mere moments. The Melta, how I love thee. And not only for the Imperium, for its basic effect is used by Eldar, Tau, and any other technologically advanced races. All have come up with some permutation of this magnificent weapon that makes me caper and sing melty melty whenever I play them. Which is most of the time, if I'm honest, because I love the cinematic feel of them. And you are about to find out why. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom.
To quote.
Melter weapons. Yes. Melter weapons are a type of thermal weapon that makes use of a subatomic reaction in a chemical fuel source to produce a tightly focused beam of intense searing heat. The Imperial melter gun and multi-melter, also known as cookers or vape guns, as well as the grenade-like melter bomb, are formidable direct energy weapons. Melter weapons have a short range, but are very powerful, and their thermal blast intensity increases as the distance to the target decreases. A melter gun works by inducing a minute submolecular reaction within a highly pressurized pyrium petrol fuel mix located within an ammunition canister, and then projecting the resulting plasma through the canister and from the weapon's barrel as a blast of incredible heat. They fire a micro sun at people.
Pretty much.
Melter usage is accompanied by a distinctive hissing sound as the beam boils away the water in the air, then a roaring blast as the beam reduces the target to charred scraps or molten slag. Melters are the premier anti-armor weapons, and few, if any, armored vehicles can withstand their power. Melters are also a useful
few, if any, meaning none,
alternative to plasma weapons for this anti-armor role. As though they generally possess a shorter range, they are a more reliable technology than most Imperial plasma weapons,
yes, they
which
are.
often injure their users, or just burn them to cinders, if you get a one. The heavy weapon known as the multi-melter resembles two melter guns fused together, with thermal beams that coalesce into a single powerful beam with a longer effective range than their smaller cousins. However, the increased size, weight and power requirements of the multi-melter mean that it is no longer man-portable by conventional human infantry. The very rare pistol variant of the melter gun, known as the Inferno pistol, can vaporize foes of any kind with ease. Lord Commander Dante, the Emperor praise his name, the chapter master of the Blood Angel Space Marines, is the most notable of the few users of the Inferno pistol in the Imperium, though among the Blood Angels the weapon is called the Infernus pistol. Inferno pistols are also favoured weapons, when available, to the acolytes and inquisitors of the Inquisition's Ordo Hereticus.
1 second, guys. Alright, back into it.
And its militant arm, the Sisters of Battle. The melter bomb is a somewhat different application of the same technological principles.
Yes.
The reactive fusion fuel in the melter bomb has already been hyper-condensed and is no less devastating, designed to consume itself in a single burst of energy. The casings of melter bombs are usually designed with magnetic or molecular bonding mechanisms, allowing them to be clamped onto large targets such as vehicles or monstrous creatures.
If you remember the Elgarzan party, that's what Nubby had.
The surface contact detonation inflicts tremendous damage, easily turning even heavily armored plate into white-hot slag in a matter of moments. Imperial Melta weapons. Beamer Melta. The Beamer Melta style of melta gun was an attempt to create a long-range melta weapon that was still light enough to be easily carried into combat. Using fragments of decaying scrolls describing several ancient design patterns, and after much divination and prayer, the Zephyrus pattern was developed. Though it still uses specialized gases melded and ignited into a submolecular thermal state, this weapon features a longer barrel with a radiation beam surrounding the gaseous discharge. This low-level radiation acts as a harmonic waveform for the superheat release, allowing it to strike at longer distances. The necessary tuning for the beam to match the discharge proved impractical in the field, however, and only those willing or able to spend many solar hours of difficult correction after prolonged use still stand by the weapon. Almost no Imperial fighting units still utilize them despite the superior range, and their manufacture ceased after the first production run. Now prized as trophy weapons, some still see use as part of elite mercenary groups or inquisitorial kill teams, which we really must discuss soon.
Yeah, at some point.
This weapon may be equipped with any type of melta canister ammunition. Melta guns and multi-melters. Well, we've already discussed those. The Colossus Bomb. The Colossus Bomb is a melta-based guided bomb that weighs 10,000 kilograms and is used by the Imperial Navy on the Marauder Colossus for high-altitude tactical attacks on heavily fortified enemy positions and fortified structures such as bunkers and more extensive subterranean facilities.
It's basically a bunker buster that melts everything in sight for about a mile.
The Magnum Melta. A Magnum Melta is a heavy, vehicle-mounted short-range area effect heat cannon. Magnum Meltas were originally designed for space assault craft to enable them to turn a large cubic voluminous spaceship hull plating into a liquid slag. A weapon of this magnitude's effects on less durable targets, such as main battle tanks and living matter, are simply catastrophic. The aptitude for use of this powerful weapon was not lost on the tech priests of Mars, who soon began mounting the Magnum Melta upon the turrets of Infernus Pattern Deimos Predators. This ancient pattern of Predator has now largely been replaced by the Land Raider Redeemer in many Space Marine chapters. The Hunting Lance, or Melta Tip. A hunting lance is a one-handed, single-use melee weapon used exclusively by the Rough Riders, mounted cavalry units of the Imperial Guard. But we've done a video on them already, so go skip to that.
Which I haven't seen, I don't think.
The Melta Cannon. A Melta Cannon is an Imperial plasma weapon that makes use of a miniature fusion reaction to produce a blast of intense searing heat, as usual. This weapon system is commonly mounted on Reaver-class and Warlord-class battle titans, but also can be mounted into the carapace hardpoints of a massive Imperator-class titan.
And these weapons are Titan killers. These weapons are what they're going to use to basically do the kill shot on a Titan once the Titan's shields have gone down, an opposing Titan. Like an Orc Gargant or a Traitor Marine or a Traitor Titan.
A smaller version of this weapon system is also mounted upon the Devil Dog variant of the Hellhound. Melta torpedoes.
How many variants do they have?
Utilized by the forces of the Imperial Navy.
Like seriously, how many variants do they have for the Hellhound? It's ridiculous.
Melta torpedoes are even more feared by starship captains than standard torpedoes. Mercifully rare and extremely brutal. Melta warheads detonate a precisely organized series of melta charges upon impact with a target, burning through hull plates and consuming sections of the vessel's interior in a roiling conflagration. When used in orbital bombardment against planetary surfaces, they are equally capable of penetrating heavily fortified structures and incinerating the occupants and contents. Pyro Melta Cannon. These squat, oversized and heavily insulated macro cannons are specifically designed to fire shells tipped with powerful melta charges that detonate with furious heat against the hulls of enemy void ships.
And that's just not right.
Now, we get on to the Eldar and the Fire Pike. The Fire Pike. A Fire Pike is a variant of the fusion gun used by the Eldari, Fire Dragon's Exarchs. These weapons are sophisticated melta weapons, marked by a distinctively long barrel, that can project its deadly melter beam a considerable distance further than the standard fusion gun used by the Imperium. These potent weapons predate the existence of the Imperium of Man, having been created by Eldari artisans long millennia ago.
They probably predate the rise of humanity into, bipedal organisms, most likely.
Operating similar to most melter weapons, fire pikes project a lance of intense heat and radiation over a considerable distance that is capable of melting flesh and steel and carving through the toughest armor with deadly precision. Rare even amongst the arsenals of the craft world Eldari, they are most often borne by the mightiest champions of their kind. Relic weapons beyond contemporary means to reproduce, even for the craft worlds. The fusion gun. The Eldari possess an unsurpassed mastery of thermal weapons, and take savage delight in the devastation they create. They utilize a deadly melter weapon known as a fusion gun, a weapon that is unique to the aspect warriors known as fire dragons amongst the Eldari. Though it can only be used at short range, it possesses a sophisticated target system, as befits high-status troops like aspect warriors. Like most Eldari technology, the weapon is physically activated, its resonant wraithbone construction being sensitive to the Eldari's innate psychic mind. A fire dragon's fusion gun is linked to its target via its handle. But they also have fusion pistols, usually used by Eldari autarchs, and of course, the Dancers of Segora, the Harlequins. This one next weapon could have an entire video unto itself, but let's stick it in here anyway. The Necron melter weapon, the Heat Ray. Ulan. A Heat Ray is a Necron weapon mounted upon the enormous mechanical spiders known as Triarch Stalkers. These deadly weapons are capable of anti-tank and anti-infantry modes of fire. The Heat Ray
Everything that Necrons possess is capable of anti-tank.
It can be fired in either a focused or dispersed beam. That's correct. They can fire it in a standard way to melt big things like anyone else can, but then they can actually fire it out like a wave of fire that melts everything in front of it. Short-ranged, but devastating. Tau melter weapons.
Oh, God.
The Fusion Blaster. Mostly used on Tau battlesuits, the Fusion Blaster is similar both technologically and tactically to an Imperial melter gun, albeit possesses a longer range and is most commonly employed by more mobile units. Fusion Cannon. A fusion cannon is a Tau version of a melter weapon, just larger than the Fusion Blaster. It can be seen on larger battlesuits and the Hammerhead gunships. Fusion Cascade. A Fusion Cascade is an experimental version of a Tau Fusion Blaster, designed for use as a weapon system on the XV-9 Hazard battlesuit. It sacrifices damage for rate of fire, with each burst unleashed by the weapon consisting of multiple shots. This means that despite each charge being less powerful than an equivalent Imperial melter weapon of similar size, the Fusion Cascade can overwhelm its target through sheer weight of fire, and is still able to reduce even the most heavily armored vehicles or fortifications to slag in the blink of an eye. Fusion Collider. Very similar to other fusion or melter weapons, it has been developed to fire completely silently, making it a perfect accompanying weapon for the stealth-orientated XV-95 battlesuit. And of course, the Fusion Eradicator. The Fusion Eradicator was designed as a radical solution to the limitations of current Tau fusion weapons technology. The Fusion Eradicator combines a battery of multiple synchronized firing chambers that can create blasts of energy so potent that any solid matter caught in its path is torn apart at a molecular level by brute thermal force, and no physical material yet known to the Tau can survive its destructive power. The cost in materials and expertise to create a single Fusion Eradicator is immense, and the natural endurance of each weapon is limited often to a single battle. Each Fusion Eradicator is then discarded and must be replaced. Currently, this weapon can only be found deployed on KX-139 Tau Unar Supremacy armor, serving as its arm weapons. And how could we possibly end without discussing the newest melter weapon? From the mind of Belisarius Core, the Melter Rifle, or Heavy Melter Rifle. Yes, Belisarius Core has spent 10,000 years not just creating the Primaris Marines, no complaints please, They exist, there's nothing we can do about it, so love it or like it, it doesn't matter. These weapons have twice the range of a normal melter weapon, and also with an ability which clearly states what they do. Total obliteration.
Nice.
It is true. The Eradicator Squad is now the king of anti-tank, and purely down to this one weapon, the Melter Rifle. End quote.
That's a long
And
quote.
so, I hope you can now see why I adore this weapon so much. Because of the imagery. Now I make no secret of my love of the common soldiery, the grunt, the foot-slogging men of the line. I have lots of vehicles, and like them plenty, but for me, it is always in the infantry. And this weapon means that any lowly ground pounder can take on and potentially bring low a mighty lord of war. For me, as you have probably guessed, it is the image of a lone warrior, or a tight cluster of a few, holding out against insurmountable odds that gets the juices flowing. The spirit of the Alamo, the thin red line, the 300 Trojans holding back a tide of enemies against all odds.
Trojans.
Each region of the globe has their tales of a band of heroes, or even just one man, turning the tide of a battle. That feeling of seeing all of the forces of hell coming inexorably onwards, only to be held back by grit and courage alone. But also for the fact that you have to get right up to point-blank range before it is possible to do this. The holding of fire until you can see the whites of their eyes. The one man or woman huddled in a trench waiting for 100-ton or more Goliath to just get close enough. To roll over the trench, to be stabbed in its heart, like Turin did unto the first dragon, Glarang. But also the feeling of fun one gets when a friend has only just espied your little unit in reserve. Holding them of no measure, holding them lightly, ignoring them utterly, and in the full flush of what they consider to be an absolute rout of your army, only to find that unit contains a melter or more. And when you bring them down, you eliminate the monster or armor they are using as a spearhead to their assault. The way that one weapon, one man, can often make a walk-over into a proper fight again. And being on the receiving end is just as much fun. More than once I've had my Land Raider Rover trundling down the field ready to open a can of whoop, his cargo of Terminators, only for a small band of pointies to jump out and fire dragon him into sludge. And of course, I love performing the same maneuver with my own fire dragons.
Nice.
Whipping out with a wave serpent and then melting a knight or something huge. Always fun. Simply put, the drama of it. And my only regret is that the present circumstances have prevented me from using my new Melty Men, an entire squad of eradicators. So aptly named, so chunky, and so melty. I desperately look forward to the day I can field them with a friend. To be honest, I'm so desperate for a game, I may just have to perform the love that dare not speak its name, and to play myself. I miss playing that much. And at the very end of the day, that is why I love Warhammer. It's not a balanced game, never will be, but it is one hell of a lot of fun. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to the Melter gun. If so, then please do consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. If you see the worth in what we are doing, then do also consider joining our Patreon, or giving the video a share if that is beyond your present scope. It would be a great boon. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Melty. Toodaloo.
It's always great here in Baldermort. It's always great here in Baldermort discussing lore in any way, shape, or form. And I still am watching the pineapple on the pizza with Baldermort from Barry Waltz. It's still one of the best things I've ever seen in my life. Just because I've watched so much stuff from Baldermort and never once heard him say a swear word at all. It was funny the first time I really talked to him, me and him spoke about it. He was like, he mentioned something to that effect. And it was funny hearing him cut loose on that Barry Waltz video. If you guys haven't seen it, it is pineapple on pizza, and Yes, Baldermort is fantastic in it, as usual. In any case, I'm going to be putting all of his links in the description down below, as well as my own. I have a Patreon myself, as well as a Discord where you can come in and put things in the request for reaction channel, upvote the videos that you want to see. And, yeah, like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you guys want to leave a comment in the comment section down below, anything helps with the algorithm, guys. Anything helps with the algorithm. Yeah, I think that's it. I have continued to edit Mistakes of the Emperor 6, which is going to be having Baldermort in as a voice actor, which I am very much looking forward to putting out. All that being said, I'll catch you guys next time.